Western Kansas, the summer of 1933. 200 farmers stand shoulder to shoulder on the courthouse steps in their good hats, arms crossed, while a sheriff's auctioneer tries to sell a foreclosed neighbor's mule team to pay off a $400 debt the drought had made impossible to cover. Every time a stranger raises a hand to bid a fair price, the men closest to him turn and stare, slow and silent, until the hand goes back down and stays down. When the gavel finally falls, the mule team sells for $1.05 to a farmer standing in the crowd who never planned on keeping a single animal he bought that day. He hands the team straight back to the family that lost it an hour before, in front of the sheriff, in front of the bank's own man, in front of God and everybody. The bank got its $1.05. The law was followed to the letter, every step of it. And every single person on that courthouse lawn knew exactly what they had just done, and knew it would work again the next county over the following week. Here's the twist, friend. None of what kept these families alive through the worst decade this country's farmland ever saw came out of a government office. Most of it, technically, broke a law somewhere along the way. And every bit of it worked. I'm Amos Whitfield, fifth generation on Whitfield land between Kansas and Nebraska. My grandfather Homer wrote most of what follows into a leather journal he kept from 1934 until the year he died, in handwriting that got smaller and tighter the harder a given winter had been. He made me promise the old ways would go on being told after him, and I intend to keep that promise for as long as this channel is standing. If you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe, because we spend our time exactly in this gap between what a law said on paper and what a family actually did to put supper on the table. Number 2 on this count is a road full of farmers who stopped being polite about it. Number 6 is the trick a whole federal agency finally admitted, years later, that they should have built first instead of last. 25 counted down, and every single one of them still works today, given the right kind of trouble. Let's start small, with the coal that fell off a train nobody was watching closely enough to notice. Number 25, coal picking along the rail line. Every time a steam locomotive took a curve too fast, lumps of coal bounced off the tender and lay scattered along the right-of-way for anyone willing to walk the tracks with a sack. Whole families in coal country and prairie towns alike heated their homes all winter on coal the railroad never sold them a ticket for. Coal that would have simply washed into the ditch grass otherwise. Railroads occasionally pressed theft charges when it suited a superintendent's mood, but most looked the other way, because chasing down a widow with a burlap sack cost more in bad publicity than the coal itself was ever worth. Relief agency records from the 30s note coal picking as a tolerated, even quietly expected survival practice in rail towns across the plains. Nobody ever built a law strong enough to stop it. Nobody with any sense at all really tried. Number 24, gleaning the wheat stubble. After the combine passed through a field, plenty of grain always shook loose and lay scattered in the stubble, free for anyone willing to bend their back and gather it by hand, same as it had been for 3,000 years. It is one of the oldest rights recorded in human law, older than the Book of Ruth, and it never once made it into American statute the way it had in the old countries. Walk onto a field you did not own to glean without asking first, and you were legally trespassing the whole time, no matter how many centuries of custom said otherwise. Farmers who remembered their own hard years mostly let it slide without a word. Today, food banks run entire gleaning networks doing precisely this, organized and funded and given a proper name, because it turns out picking up what the harvest leaves behind still feeds people just fine. Number 23, rainwater off the barn roof. A trough under the eave and a cistern below it caught every drop that fell on a prairie farm, and in dry country that water belonged to whoever's roof it hit, as far as any homesteader was ever concerned. Several western states built their entire water law around the opposite idea, that rain belonged to the river it would have eventually reached. And every downstream user with older rights on that river, treating a farmer's own rain barrel as a technical infringement on somebody miles away. Colorado didn't fully walk that back until a bill in 2009. The Environmental Protection Agency now actively promotes rainwater harvesting as smart, modern conservation. The barn roof was right the whole time. It just took the law about 80 years to agree. Number 22. The root cellar that did two jobs. Dug into a rise behind the house, timbered and packed with earth on every side, it held potatoes and cabbage at a steady temperature straight through winter. And it happened to be the single safest place on the entire property when the sky turned green and started to funnel. Building codes eventually required permits, engineering approval, and formal inspection for any below-grade structure, turning what used to be a shovel and a Saturday into a stack of paperwork and a fee. FEMA's own modern safe room guidance recommends exactly the same underground structure your great-grandmother dug for her potatoes 80 years ago. She built the room without asking anybody. Nobody ever had to teach her twice. Number 21. Selling home-butchered meat to the neighbors. Hog killing time meant more pork than one family could eat before it spoiled, and cash in a drought year was worth considerably more than a full smokehouse nobody could sell from. Selling that extra meat down the road, though, meant selling meat that had never once seen a state inspector's stamp, which state meat laws increasingly required as the 30s wore on, mostly at the urging of the larger packing houses who stood to lose the least from the paperwork. The USDA today still permits on-farm slaughter for personal use without a single hitch. It only ever really wanted to license the sale. Number 20. Saving your own wheat seed. A farmer would hold back the best of this year's crop specifically to plant next spring, the same seed line running through a single family for generations, at no cost beyond the grain itself, sitting right there in the bin. State seed certification programs, growing fast through the 20s and 30s and backed hard by the earliest seed companies, push steadily toward buying fresh certified seed every single season instead of trusting your own. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization now calls farmer-saved seed essential to the whole world's crop diversity. The wheat never once needed the certificate to grow. First pattern break, friend. Everything so far your great-grandparents could have explained over supper without blinking, plain as passing the potatoes. What's coming next gets a little more dangerous to admit out loud, and a little further outside what the law was ever willing to overlook. Number 19. The drought year still. When wheat failed 3 years running, and there was nothing left in the bin worth hauling to the elevator, a copper pot and a corn mash fermenting in an oak barrel turned into the only cash crop a family had left standing. Federal law had taxed home distilling since the Internal Revenue Act of 1862, written specifically so the government could collect its cut. And it still does today, word for word. I'm not telling you to run one, friend. I am telling you plenty of prairie families did, quietly, out behind the barn where the smoke wouldn't show against the sky, and fed their children on it through years the wheat gave them nothing at all. Number 18. Snaring rabbits without a license. Jackrabbits tore through what little green survived a drought year by the thousands, and a family desperate for meat rarely stopped to buy a state hunting license before setting a snare in a fence gap. Most states quietly stopped enforcing license law against clearly hungry families during the worst relief years and informal hardship exemption. Plenty of wardens still carry on the books today for exactly this kind of genuine emergency. Number 17. Meadowlarks in the stew pot. Songbirds were easy to snare and plentiful on the open prairie, sitting right out on the fence wire waiting for a boy with a length of string, and plenty of families ate them without a second thought when the smokehouse ran empty and the rabbits had already gone thin. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 made that a federal crime almost overnight, aimed originally at market hunters wiping out entire species for the millinery trade. And here I'll be straight with you, friend. This is the one item on this whole list where the law got it right from the start. Some birds needed protecting more than any one family needed convincing otherwise. The Fish and Wildlife Service still enforces that exact law today, and it should. Number 16. The neighbor midwife. A woman with steady hands and 20 years of practice behind her delivered most of the babies on a prairie section for a chicken or a sack of flour or sometimes nothing at all. No medical license required anywhere on the plains. States began requiring formal midwife licensing through the 20s and 30s. pushed hard by a physician's lobby that wanted every birth moved into a hospital bed and a doctor's fee. Modern data on low-risk midwife-attended births show outcomes every bit as safe as a hospital delivery, and licensed midwifery is legal in every state again, today. Number 15. Raw milk off the back porch. A family with one good milk cow sold the extra straight to the neighbors down the road, unpasteurized, the exact same way milk had always been sold on the plains. The Standard Milk Ordinance of 1924 pushed pasteurization hard for anything sold commercially, drafted with plenty of input from the larger dairy operations who could afford the equipment small farms could not. Raw milk sales are legal again today in a growing number of states, sold at a premium to people who never once had to live through why the ordinance got written in the first place. Second pattern break. From here to the bottom, friend. Every single item left on this list was somebody standing between their family and a system that had already, quietly, decided how the story was going to end without asking them. Number 14. Bartering straight around the relief script. Government commodity certificates were only good at approved stores that had signed on to the program. But a family that traded eggs directly for a hog quarter with the farm down the road never touched the paper at all, technically outside the rules of the relief program, and the program officers knew it happened constantly and mostly shrugged. The IRS today simply taxes barter as ordinary income and calls the whole practice perfectly legal. It never needed to be illegal in the first place. It only ever needed a form. Number 13. Digging a well without a county permit, a shovel, a length of pipe, and a spot the local water witcher pointed his forked stick toward got you water without asking anybody's permission on paper, same as it had for every generation before yours. Groundwater permitting, tightened up state by state after the Dust Bowl itself showed the whole country exactly how fast a water table could crash under enough straws pulling from it at once. Most states still exempt small domestic wells from the heaviest permitting requirements today. Quietly admitting the old shovel and pipe approach mostly worked fine on its own the whole time. Number 12. Cutting deadfall on federal land. Downed timber lying on federal range was free heat for anyone willing to load a wagon and haul it home before the next storm buried it in snow, right up until the Forest Service, formed in 1905, began requiring a permit for exactly that kind of ordinary gathering. Timber companies holding an interest in federal land leases were not exactly unhappy to see the practice tightened up and formalized. The Forest Service still issues firewood permits today, the very same trade in principle. They just charge a small fee for the paperwork now. Number 11. Burning the range for grasshoppers. A controlled fire set across dry stubble in the fall killed grasshopper eggs by the million before they ever had the chance to hatch out the following spring. Set without asking any county office for permission first, because nobody on the plains had ever needed to ask before a single soul thought to write the rule. Burn permit systems grew up through the 30s, specifically aimed at stopping exactly this kind of unannounced fire from getting away from a farmer in dry wind. Agricultural extension offices today teach prescribed burning as sound, recommended range management, taught in workshops with handouts and a certificate at the end. Your great-grandfather was just doing it a season early, on his own schedule, with nothing but his own judgment to answer to. Number 10. Squatting in a foreclosed farmhouse. When a bank took a place and left it standing empty through a whole winter, the next family with nowhere else to go sometimes simply moved in, rather than watch a good house rot for nobody's benefit. Trespassing, plainly, under any reading of the law. Communities mostly looked away regardless, because an empty house helping nobody offended Prairie sense a good deal more than the paperwork ever did. Third pattern break. The last stretch, friend. Everything from here down is where families stopped hiding what they were doing behind a barn and started doing it out in the open, together, in broad daylight, in front of anybody who cared to watch. Number 9. Sharing a cut fence to reach water. In the driest years, a rancher would cut his own wire where it crossed a dry stretch of pasture, so cattle from two spreads could both reach a neighbor's stock pond, an old open-range custom that ran straight against fence law on the books since the barbed wire disputes of the 1880s. Neighbors mostly settled it themselves over coffee at the kitchen table rather than call a sheriff over a strand of wire and a thirsty herd. Number 8. Riding the rails to find work. A man out of options climbed into an empty boxcar and rode toward wherever the harvest or the oil fields were hiring that season, plainly trespassing on railroad property for every mile of the trip. An entire unofficial economy of harvest labor moved across this country for the better part of a decade, riding exactly that way, boxcar to boxcar, county to county, and most railroads, most of the time. Simply let it happen because stopping it would have cost more than it ever saved. Number 7. Living in the ditchbank camp. Families with nowhere else to stop pitched a tent in the road, right of way outside a California farm town, cooking over a small fire within sight of passing traffic, and several counties passed anti-camping ordinances aimed squarely at moving them along. The federal government's own eventual answer, camps like Weed Patch built by the Farm Security Administration with real sanitation and real oversight, was to build a sanctioned version of the exact same thing those ordinances had spent years outlawing. The government eventually agreed with the ditch camp, friend. It just took a federal agency and a great deal of bad press to say so out loud. Number 6. The Farm Holiday Association's road blockade. Farmers across Iowa and into the neighboring plains states in 1932 physically blocked highways leading into towns like Sioux City, turning away milk trucks and produce wagons rather than sell crops at prices below what it had cost to grow them in the first place. Blocking a public road is a crime under any reading of the law you care to open. It also worked well enough to force real, urgent conversations about farm prices in state capitals within a matter of months. Number 5. The penny auction. The scene we opened with, friend, farmers packing a foreclosure sale shoulder to shoulder and staring down anyone who dared bid a fair price, so a neighbor's mule team or plow sold for pocket change and went straight back to the family that lost it an hour earlier. Intimidating bidders at a public auction is textbook criminal conspiracy under the law. Prosecutors rarely pursued it in practice because juries pulled from those same counties would not convict their own neighbors for it. And every prosecutor on the circuit knew that going in. Number 4. Crossing the state line without proof you could support yourself. In February of 1936, Los Angeles sent 136 police officers out to 16 points along California's border and turned back anyone who looked too poor to belong in the state at all. American citizens turned away from their own country by their own police on the grounds of a 1933 indigent law passed specifically for this purpose. It lasted barely 2 months before money troubles and lawsuits killed it outright, and the Supreme Court finally struck the whole underlying idea down for good in 1941, ruling flatly that no state gets to decide who is too poor to cross its own border. Number 3. Hiding the last cow from the assessor. When a debt came due and a county assessor rode out to tally up what could legally be seized to cover it, more than one Prairie family walked their last milk cow into a neighbor's back pasture the night before and swore, with a perfectly straight face, that they never owned one to begin with. Perjury, technically, and fraud against a lawful debt. No question about it. It also meant a family ate through another winter instead of losing the one animal standing. Between them and nothing at all. Number 2. Standing at the top of the lane. When word came that a sheriff was riding out to serve foreclosure papers on a farm, in more than one county the neighbors simply showed up first, standing quietly across the lane in their work clothes with no weapon raised and nothing said out loud, until the car carrying the papers turned around on its own and drove back the way it came. Obstruction, if anyone had ever seriously tried to charge it. Almost nobody ever did. Because the sight of 40 neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder in a farm lane was its own kind of argument no judge particularly wanted to referee in open court. Number 1 is not a trick, friend, and by now you likely saw it coming before I said it. It is what all 24 of the others were built out of. The one thread running under every item on this whole count. A Prairie family in the 1930s did not survive the worst decade this land ever saw because Washington sent the right form at the right time. filled out correctly in triplicate and mailed back on schedule. They survived because the family 2 farms over showed up, broke the same small rules right alongside them without being asked twice, and never once expected to be paid back for it. That is not lawlessness, whatever a courthouse might have called it on a given Tuesday. That is what a community does when the law itself stops being able to feed anybody standing in front of it. Homer's journal has one line about the mule team auction I opened this video with, written in his own hand not 2 pages after the fact. He wrote, "We were never breaking the law that morning, friend. We were just refusing to let it break us." Comment down below and tell me if your own family had a story like the mule team, or the milk strike, or the penny that bought back a plow nobody thought they'd see again. Maybe it's a story about a well dug without asking, or a cow that never officially existed on paper. I read every single one, and the story that shows up most in the comments is the one I build the next video around. Pick one thing out of this count and carry it forward this week, friend, however small it feels sitting there on the page. Learn the name of one neighbor you have never once spoken to, and go say hello before the week is out. That is the whole trick. 25 times over, boiled all the way down to its root. Next time on this channel, I'll walk you through the 2-cent trick that kept a whole county's seed corn alive through a drought the extension office swore could not be beaten, and the exact year the hybrid seed companies made sure nobody would ever need to remember it again. I'm Amos Whitfield, and thank you kindly for listening.